What if the story that millions around the world call the greatest romance of all time was never meant to be simply a tale of love, but a mirror held up to the pride, prejudice, ambition, and hidden rules of a society obsessed with appearances? Imagine a world where every look, every conversation, every decision a woman made was silently weighed on the scales of wealth and social standing. This is the world Jane Austen wrote into existence over 2 centuries ago, yet its lessons still echo into our modern lives. Pride and Prejudice is not just a romance, it is a revelation. It is the story of a young woman who dares to speak when silence would have been safer, of a man whose arrogance hides a storm of vulnerability, and of a society where a single rumor could destroy a family forever. Everyone thought it was simply a charming dance of witty words and courtship, but beneath the laughter of ballroom music was a battlefield of class, dignity, and survival. It is easy today to laugh at the dramatic proposals, the proud glances, and the sharp comebacks. But for the people living in Austen's world, every refusal, every acceptance, every marriage was a matter of life and death. And that is the hook that pulls us in. Because the truth behind Pride and Prejudice is much darker, much more dangerous, and infinitely more human than the polished image of a romantic comedy. The England of Jane Austen's time was a place of rigid boundaries. A woman's fate was rarely in her own hands. Property, wealth, and inheritance passed almost entirely through the male line, leaving women to survive by attaching themselves to husbands who could provide financial security. To be unmarried past a certain age was not simply a personal misfortune, it was a social disgrace. Families with many daughters, like the Bennets, lived under the constant pressure that one wrong move, one scandal, or one poor choice could doom all of their children to a life of poverty and shame. The air was thick with unspoken rules: who you could talk to, who you could marry, what fortune you must bring, and how your family's reputation could elevate or destroy your chances. Pride and Prejudice takes place in this suffocating world where the glitter of ballrooms and the charm of polite conversation hid the desperation of families bargaining with their daughters' futures. It was not love alone that guided the heart, it was survival. And in such a society, every decision Elizabeth Bennet made was an act of quiet rebellion, every rejection a blow struck against a system that measured women by their dowries and men by their estates. Jane Austen knew this world intimately. Born into the gentry, but without great wealth herself, she saw both sides of the social divide. She knew the elegance of tea parties and country balls, but she also knew the quiet anxiety of women whose entire lives depended on securing a respectable marriage. Pride and Prejudice is, at its heart, a critique hidden within a love story. By wrapping social commentary in the sugar-coating of witty dialogue and romantic intrigue, Austen could safely expose the flaws of her society without being dismissed as bitter or radical. She showed her readers that love could not flourish where pride ruled the heart, and that prejudice blinded people to the truth of character. Her England was not just a backdrop of pretty dresses and charming estates. It was a battlefield where every polite conversation carried the weight of strategy, every smile was a move in a game, and every silence concealed 1,000 unspoken fears. Imagine the Bennet household: 5 daughters, no sons, and a father whose estate could not pass to any of them. From the very first page of Pride and Prejudice, we are thrown into the tension that dominated families like theirs. It is a truth universally acknowledged, Austen begins, that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. The line is sharp, ironic, and unforgettable. It tells us everything. Women were in desperate need of wealthy husbands, and wealthy men were hunted for marriage whether they wanted it or not. Love might be part of the equation, but fortune was the language everyone understood. The Bennets' situation is precarious. Without a male heir, their home and land would pass to a distant cousin, Mr. Collins, leaving the daughters essentially homeless unless they married well. This looming disaster is not an invention of drama. It was the lived reality of countless families across England. When Elizabeth Bennet refuses Mr. Collins, she is not merely turning down a pompous fool, she is risking her family's future security. Her choice is shocking precisely because it is dangerous. In Austen's time, few young women could afford to say no. This is the society Austen sketches with such precision. A society that dressed desperation in silk gowns, masked greed with polite manners, and transformed marriage into a marketplace where affection was a luxury few could afford. Every dance, every dinner invitation, every letter carried consequences. A rumor of impropriety could stain a family forever. A foolish sister's mistake could ruin the prospects of all. Beneath the laughter and wit, Pride and Prejudice shows us a world ruled by fear. The fear of poverty, of disgrace, of being left behind in a society where security depended entirely on appearances. Yet Austen does not present this world with bitterness alone. She gives us Elizabeth who dares to be different. Through Elizabeth's sharp eyes and fearless tongue, we glimpse the possibility of love built on respect rather than convenience, of choice rather than coercion. And it is this spark of rebellion, hidden within the comedy of manners, that has made the novel timeless. The world of Pride and Prejudice is therefore not just the background for a romance. It is the engine that drives the story forward. The tension between individual desire and societal expectation pulses through every chapter. Austen forces her readers to see that behind every charming proposal lies an equation of wealth and class, and behind every witty refusal is the silent scream of a woman demanding to be valued for more than her dowry. This is why her story continues to resonate centuries later. Because beneath the corsets and carriages, Pride and Prejudice is about the most human struggle of all, the fight to be seen, respected, and loved for who we truly are, not for what society expects us to be. Elizabeth Bennet emerges as a figure unlike almost any other woman of her time, and certainly unlike the countless heroines of the sentimental novels that flooded England in the early 19th century. She is intelligent, playful, quick to laugh, and sharper in wit than most of the men who try to out-talk her. From the first moments we encounter her, she refuses to be defined solely by her beauty or her prospects. What makes Elizabeth unforgettable is her courage to question the very foundation of the society around her. She is surrounded by women trained to submit, to accept proposals whether or not affection exists, to see marriage as a calculation rather than a connection. Yet Elizabeth does something daring. She demands respect. When Mr. Collins, a pompous clergyman who stands to inherit her family's home, proposes to her, the expectation is simple. She must accept. To marry him would secure the Bennet estate, protect her mother and sisters, and fulfill the single duty women were told they owed their families. But Elizabeth says no. That act of refusal reverberates through the novel, shaking the stability of her family and stunning readers of Austen's day. In that one decision, she claims ownership of her future. She will not marry without love. She will not barter her independence for security. And though her choice is deeply risky, it sets her apart as a heroine not of passive compliance, but of active rebellion. Yet Elizabeth's rebellion is not loud or theatrical. It is subtle, threaded through her sharp dialogue and her unwillingness to bend under pressure. She observes the arrogance of men like Darcy, mocks the foolishness of Collins, and refuses to flatter those who expect her submission. When Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Darcy's wealthy and domineering aunt, attempts to intimidate her into renouncing any claim on Darcy's affection, Elizabeth refuses to bow. She stands her ground with remarkable composure, declaring that she will not be told whom she can or cannot love. This defiance makes her not only a heroine of fiction, but a symbol of a broader human struggle, the right to define one's life without bending to unjust authority. She is flawed, of course. Her prejudice against Darcy blinds her, and her pride in her own judgment sometimes misleads her. But those very flaws make her real. Elizabeth Bennet is not a perfect angel dropped into a romantic comedy. She is a woman of flesh and fire, willing to risk disgrace for the sake of authenticity. Her rebellion lies in her refusal to accept the life others have plotted for her, and in that refusal she becomes one of literature's most enduring icons of independence. Standing across from Elizabeth is Fitzwilliam Darcy, a man whose name has become synonymous with brooding pride and reluctant passion. When he first appears, he is almost impossible to love, wealthy, handsome, but cold, aloof, and painfully conscious of his superior status. At the famous Meryton Assembly, he refuses to dance with any woman he deems beneath him, even dismissing Elizabeth as tolerable but not handsome enough to tempt me. That single line brands him as arrogant, and for many readers it seems to confirm the worst stereotypes of the privileged elite. Yet Darcy is not a caricature of pride. He is a man trapped in it. His wealth and breeding have isolated him, teaching him that affection must be measured against social class, that intimacy must always be policed by the invisible boundaries of reputation. His pride is his shield, but it is also his prison. What makes Darcy compelling is not his initial arrogance, but the slow unveiling of his deeper self. Beneath the polished exterior lies a man fiercely loyal to those he loves, capable of deep generosity and tormented by the fear of vulnerability. His affection for Elizabeth is both a revelation and a threat to his identity. To love her is to risk his reputation, to challenge the invisible rules that tell him he must marry wealth and status equal to his own. And so, when he first proposes to Elizabeth, his words betray the very pride he cannot escape. He tells her that he loves her in spite of her low connections and inferior status, as if her worthiness were something to be forgiven rather than celebrated. In that moment, Elizabeth's rejection is more than justified, it is necessary. Her anger pierces through his armor, forcing him to see that love without respect is no love at all. The brilliance of Austen's portrayal of Darcy is that she does not leave him trapped in arrogance. Instead, she allows him to grow. His love for Elizabeth compels him to confront his pride, to examine the prejudice that blinds him, and to change. Unlike so many romantic heroes who conquer through power or wealth, Darcy conquers by learning humility. He begins to act not for his own vanity, but for Elizabeth's happiness, even when he expects no reward. His intervention in Lydia Bennet's scandal is done in secrecy, not for applause, but for love. This transformation is what elevates him from an aloof gentleman to a partner worthy of Elizabeth's hand, and it is what makes their eventual union so satisfying. It is not merely a triumph of attraction, but a meeting of equals forged through humility and respect. Together, Elizabeth and Darcy embody the tension at the heart of the novel, the clash between personal authenticity and social expectation. Elizabeth refuses to marry without affection, while Darcy must learn that true worth lies not in titles or estates, but in character. Their story is not a smooth path of mutual attraction, but a battlefield of misunderstandings, wounded pride, and sharp prejudice. Austen builds their relationship not with soft sighs, but with verbal duels, moments of mutual misjudgment, and gradual revelations. Each is forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Elizabeth must admit that her quick judgment of Darcy was unfair, and Darcy must recognize that his condescension has blinded him to Elizabeth's true brilliance. Their love is therefore not an escape from conflict, but the fruit of conflict overcome. This is why Pride and Prejudice endures as more than a romantic fantasy. It is not the story of perfect people falling effortlessly in love. It is the story of flawed individuals learning, changing, and growing into love. Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy's arrogance and Darcy's pride against Elizabeth's lower status mirror the universal human tendency to judge hastily, to cling to ego, to protect ourselves from vulnerability by hiding behind superiority. Their journey is our journey, and when at last they come together, it is not because one has surrendered to the other, but because both have transformed. Austen shows us that real love is not blind. It sees clearly, acknowledges flaws, and chooses commitment anyway. The pride that once divided them becomes the humility that unites them, and the prejudice that clouded their vision gives way to recognition of true character. That is the genius of Austen's design. A love story that feels as fresh today as it did 2 centuries ago, because it speaks not only to romance, but to the struggle of every human heart. The Bennet family, already vulnerable because of the lack of a male heir, faced its most terrifying moment when scandal burst into their lives through Lydia, the youngest and most reckless of the daughters. Lydia, careless, flirtatious, and blind to the weight of social judgment, ran away with George Wickham, a man whose charming smile masked a heart full of deceit. In the world of Austen's England, an elopement without marriage was not merely a personal disgrace, it was a social death sentence. One sister's folly could ruin the reputation of them all. A whisper of impropriety spread like fire across the villages, consuming the family's honor in smoke. For Elizabeth, the news was devastating. She knew that Lydia's thoughtlessness, combined with Wickham's villainy, threatened to undo everything. Not only would her sister's chances of respectable marriage vanish, but her own budding understanding with Darcy would wither in the shame of her family's downfall. The scandal cast a long shadow over the Bennet household. Mrs. Bennet wailed and panicked, fearing for her daughters' futures. Mr. Bennet blamed himself, retreating into despair, acknowledging that his own negligence had allowed Lydia to run wild. Elizabeth was torn between anger at her sister and sorrow for the destruction unfolding around them. Society would not forgive such an act. Even if Lydia and Wickham married later, the stain would linger. It was as though the entire family had been dragged into the mud, and no amount of washing could cleanse them. In Austen's time, a scandal like this was not just gossip. It was a sentence of social exile. A family tainted by disgrace was treated as diseased, unfit for respectable connections, and condemned to the margins of polite society. Yet in this moment of darkness, a quiet act of redemption was already at work. Darcy, whose pride once made him aloof and untouchable, stepped forward in secret to protect Elizabeth and her family. He tracked down Lydia and Wickham, confronted the gambler and seducer who had nearly destroyed them, and paid Wickham's debts to compel him into marriage. Darcy's intervention was not done with the hope of applause. He did not seek to parade his generosity before Elizabeth or the world. Instead, he hid his actions, ensuring that only those who needed to know were aware of his sacrifice. This concealment revealed more about his transformation than any speech could. The man who once declared Elizabeth not handsome enough to tempt him now humbled himself to rescue her family from disgrace. Pride gave way to love, and arrogance yielded to responsibility. For Elizabeth, the truth of Darcy's involvement came not immediately, but in time, like the slow dawning of sunlight after a storm. When she learned that Darcy had been the quiet hand behind Lydia's salvation, her heart was struck with both gratitude and shame. She remembered every harsh word she had spoken to him, every unjust judgment she had made. The prejudice that once colored her vision dissolved, replaced by admiration and a growing tenderness. Darcy's act was not the empty gallantry of a man trying to win affection. It was the costly sacrifice of one who cared more for Elizabeth's peace than for his own pride. This revelation became the turning point of the novel. In saving Lydia, Darcy not only redeemed the Bennet family in society's eyes, but also redeemed himself in Elizabeth's. The transformation of their relationship from sharp conflict to mutual respect is one of literature's most compelling arcs. Elizabeth, who once prided herself on her quick judgment, learned the danger of prejudice. Darcy, who once guarded his superiority, learned the necessity of humility. Their personal evolutions mirror one another, converging until love becomes possible, not because they ignored their flaws, but because they confronted them. Elizabeth's laughter, once laced with mockery, softened into understanding. Darcy's silence, once heavy with arrogance, grew gentle with sincerity. When at last they spoke to one another again with hearts laid bare, their words carried the weight of transformation. This was not infatuation. It was love, forged in fire, tested by scandal, purified by humility. Their love triumphs not in defiance of society, but in quiet victory over its constraints. Elizabeth and Darcy do not dismantle the system of class and inheritance that hemmed them in, but they carve out a space where mutual respect defies its cold arithmetic. When Darcy proposes again, the words are not laced with condescension, but with reverence. Elizabeth accepts, not out of desperation, but out of recognition of a man who has changed. Their union becomes more than a romantic resolution. It is the symbolic triumph of character over class, of growth over stubbornness, of authenticity over facade. In choosing one another, they declare that pride and prejudice need not dictate destiny. The resonance of this triumph reaches far beyond their fictional village. Austen's readers saw in Elizabeth a glimpse of their own desire for independence, their longing to be valued for more than fortune or family name. They saw in Darcy the possibility that even the proudest heart could soften, that love could break through the armor of arrogance. Their story promised that dignity and affection could coexist, that a woman could insist on respect without surrendering tenderness, and that a man could embrace vulnerability without losing strength. Centuries later, the legacy of Elizabeth and Darcy continues to ripple outward. Pride and Prejudice remains not just a novel, but a mirror reflecting the eternal human struggle between ego and empathy, between judgment and understanding. In classrooms, adaptations, and countless retellings, their love story endures because it is not fragile. It is not a fairy tale that wilts in the sunlight of reality. It is a story that survives because it acknowledges flaws, embraces mistakes, and insists that true connection grows only when pride bows and prejudice dissolves. Their victory is not simply marriage. It is the proof that transformation is possible, that love is not blind but clear-eyed, and that even in a world bound by rules and expectations, the heart can carve its own path. Darcy's redemption did not end with rescuing Lydia and her family from disgrace. It marked the beginning of his deepest transformation. His gesture revealed a truth about love that Elizabeth could no longer ignore. Love, in its purest form, is not a boast but a sacrifice, not a demand but a quiet offering. When she reflected on what he had done for her family, her prejudice melted away, and the image of Darcy as a man of unyielding pride gave way to the recognition of a man of integrity, compassion, and unspoken devotion. It was as though a veil had been lifted from her eyes, and the truth of his character shone brighter than all the misunderstandings that had clouded their story. For the first time, Elizabeth began to see him not as an adversary or an arrogant suitor, but as someone capable of love that transcended the chains of society's judgment. Darcy himself, too, was no longer the man who had once delivered a proposal dripping with condescension. His second approach to Elizabeth was born not out of pride, but out of humility. He did not assume her acceptance, nor did he frame his affection as a burden she should be grateful to receive. Instead, he placed his heart before her, stripped of arrogance, clothed only in sincerity. This transformation of tone reveals the depth of his growth. A man once defined by superiority had learned to kneel before love. In this moment, Austen demonstrates that true strength lies not in domination, but in vulnerability, that dignity is not diminished by humility, but magnified by it. Darcy's redemption is not simply in action, but in character, and it is precisely this change that makes his union with Elizabeth inevitable and deserved. Elizabeth, for her part, undergoes an equally profound transformation. The woman who once prided herself on her sharp judgments learned that wit and discernment, while valuable, could also mislead. Her prejudice against Darcy, her quick embrace of Wickham's lies, her certainty in her own perceptions, all of these errors humbled her. Yet this humility did not crush her spirit. It refined it. Elizabeth did not lose her independence or her voice, but she gained the wisdom to pair them with self-awareness. When she accepted Darcy's proposal, it was not as a woman who had been conquered, but as a partner who had grown. Austen allows Elizabeth to maintain her fiery wit, her courage, and her refusal to bend to empty authority. But she tempers these qualities with the recognition that love requires openness as well as strength, and that the heart must sometimes surrender its prejudices to embrace truth. The union of Elizabeth and Darcy becomes a triumph precisely because it is earned. Neither character is perfect. Both must confront their flaws and reshape themselves. Their love is not the lightning strike of instant attraction, but the steady flame that emerges when pride is dismantled and prejudice dissolved. This is why readers find their story so enduring. It is not fantasy, not an illusion of flawless lovers, but a mirror of the human journey toward connection. Real love, Austen suggests, is not the absence of conflict, but the willingness to grow through it. Elizabeth and Darcy stand as proof that love requires courage, the courage to admit error, to forgive, to change, and to open one's heart even when it has been bruised by judgment and ego. The triumph of love in Pride and Prejudice is not simply personal, it is symbolic. Their marriage defies the weight of class distinctions that threaten to keep them apart. Elizabeth, the daughter of a modest country gentleman with no fortune, and Darcy, the wealthy heir to grand estates, represent the bridging of social divides through genuine affection and respect. Their union declares that character matters more than connections, that respect matters more than wealth, and that love grounded in equality can overcome the artificial hierarchies of birth. In this sense, Austen critiques the society around her even as she entertains it. She offers her readers a vision of marriage not as a cold transaction, but as a partnership of equals, forged in honesty, respect, and shared growth. This was a radical vision in her time, cloaked in the wit of her prose and the charm of her characters, but it resonates with timeless power. The triumph is also deeply emotional. Readers feel the satisfaction of Darcy's humility rewarded, of Elizabeth's independence vindicated, of the obstacles that once seemed insurmountable overcome at last. Their final coming together is not a surprise twist, but a fulfillment of all that the novel has been building toward. The collapse of ego and the rise of love. Every sharp exchange, every moment of misunderstanding, every wound inflicted by pride or prejudice finds its healing in the recognition of each other's true selves. When they at last stand united, readers feel not only the joy of romance, but the relief of justice. Justice for Elizabeth's wit, which deserved respect, and justice for Darcy's devotion, which proved itself in action. Their triumph is not simply personal happiness, it is the validation of the idea that love, when purified of selfishness, can transcend all barriers. This transformation and triumph reverberate far beyond the confines of the novel. For Austen's readers, the story challenged them to question their own assumptions. How often do we, like Elizabeth, let prejudice blind us to the truth of another's character? How often do we, like Darcy, let pride shield us from vulnerability and connection? Austen's novel does not merely entertain with witty banter and romantic tension, it confronts us with the uncomfortable truth that love requires the dismantling of ego. It demands that we see others clearly, and that we see ourselves with honesty. This lesson is as urgent now as it was 2 centuries ago. The legacy of Elizabeth and Darcy's love is visible in every adaptation, every retelling, every time the novel is pressed into the hands of a new reader. It speaks to young women searching for role models of independence, to men learning that humility is not weakness, to anyone who has struggled against the judgments of society or the blindness of their own heart. Austen's triumph is not simply in crafting a beautiful love story, but in embedding within it a critique of her society and a vision of something greater. Her characters live beyond their time because their struggles are ours. Pride and Prejudice are not relics of the past. They remain alive in every culture, every community, every human heart. And so the victory of Elizabeth and Darcy is not only theirs, it belongs to us all, reminding us that true connection requires growth, courage, and the willingness to see beyond the masks of ego. In the end, the transformation of hearts and the triumph of love in Pride and Prejudice leave us with a profound truth. Love is not passive, not automatic, not guaranteed. It is a choice, a labor, a journey. Elizabeth and Darcy chose to confront their flaws, to forgive, to change. They chose humility over arrogance, understanding over judgment, love over ego. That is why their story endures. Not because it gives us a perfect fantasy, but because it shows us the path to something real. And in that reality, in that earned triumph, lies the reason why Jane Austen's tale has become immortal, why readers still turn its pages with eager hearts, and why Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy remain, after 200 years, the most beloved lovers in all of literature. Their union was more than a romantic resolution. It was a victory carved against the expectations of their world. Elizabeth and Darcy's marriage did not simply unite two individuals. It stitched together two families, two classes, and two worldviews that had been set against each other from the very beginning. In the drawing rooms of Hertfordshire and the grand halls of Pemberley, their names had once carried different weights. Elizabeth, a witty daughter from a family on the edge of social decline, and Darcy, a man whose fortune and rank made him untouchable. To see them stand together at last was to witness the collapse of barriers that seemed unshakable. It was a statement, silent but undeniable, that character could triumph over class and that love could overthrow the tyranny of appearances. The triumph of love in Pride and Prejudice is not loud or flamboyant. It does not roar in declarations or explode in dramatic rescues. Instead, it settles like a profound stillness after a storm. The calm that comes when two souls finally recognize one another without illusion. Their marriage is the fruit of a hard-won journey, and because of that, it is satisfying not only to the characters, but to every reader who has walked beside them. When Elizabeth accepts Darcy, she is not merely securing wealth or status. She is affirming that she values him for who he has become. When Darcy takes Elizabeth as his wife, he is not lowering himself, as Lady Catherine once sneered, but elevating love above the cold dictates of class. Their triumph is quiet, but it resounds louder than any societal judgment. This victory is especially striking when viewed against the backdrop of the society Austen painted. Marriage in her world was too often reduced to economics. Women were measured by their dowries, men by their incomes, and affection was treated as an indulgence, a luxury secondary to security. Yet Elizabeth and Darcy's union insisted that affection must be central, that respect and equality must stand at the heart of love. Their story offered Austen's readers something radical cloaked in familiarity, the vision of a marriage founded not on convenience but on choice. For women who longed for more than survival, Elizabeth's triumph was a beacon. For men who were taught that pride and distance were marks of dignity, Darcy's humility offered a new model of strength. Together they rewrote the meaning of marriage for their readers, declaring that true partnership could exist even in a society built to deny it. The satisfaction of their triumph radiates through every detail of the novel's closing chapters. Even Mr. Bennet, so often detached and ironic, feels the relief of knowing that his spirited daughter has secured both affection and security. Mrs. Bennet, blinded by her obsession with wealth and status, rejoices in the match, not because of its emotional depth, but because of Darcy's fortune. Yet even her shallow celebration underscores the reversal of fortunes. The Bennet family, once on the brink of ruin through Lydia's scandal, is now lifted by Elizabeth's marriage into a position of unexpected stability. Society, which once whispered with contempt about the Bennet girls, must now bow in respect to the union of Elizabeth and Darcy. The world that judged so harshly is forced to acknowledge that the girl once dismissed as not handsome enough is now mistress of Pemberley. But the greatest triumph lies not in wealth, not in rank, not even in reputation. It lies in the transformation of two hearts. Elizabeth has grown beyond her prejudice, Darcy beyond his pride, and in that growth they have discovered one another's true worth. This triumph is not given, but earned, not imposed, but chosen. It is this quality that makes their story eternal. Readers see in them the possibility that love can overcome the walls we build around ourselves, that humility can heal arrogance, and that forgiveness can restore what pride has shattered. Their love story is not fantasy. It is hope woven into narrative, the assurance that genuine connection is possible even in a world determined to divide. The legacy of Pride and Prejudice reaches far beyond its final pages. More than 2 centuries after its publication, the novel continues to inspire, to challenge, and to comfort. Its endurance lies in the universality of its themes. Pride and Prejudice are not bound to the drawing rooms of Regency England. They are woven into the fabric of human nature. Every generation knows the sting of judgment, the blindness of assumption, the pain of ego. And every generation longs for the redemption that Elizabeth and Darcy embody. Their story has been told and retold, adapted into films, modern novels, and stage productions, each finding in it a timeless mirror. Whether set in 19th-century estates or modern high schools, the core remains. 2 people divided by pride and prejudice must learn humility and empathy to discover love. The reflection that Austen leaves us with is as sharp today as it was in her own era. Are we so different from the society she critiqued? Do we not still measure worth by wealth, status, or appearance? Do we not still let pride blind us to the humanity of others, and prejudice lead us to dismiss what we do not understand? Pride and Prejudice remains powerful because it refuses to let us rest comfortably. It asks us to look inward, to question the ways we let ego shape our choices, to confront the judgments that cloud our vision. Elizabeth and Darcy may find their happy ending, but Austen leaves us with the responsibility to seek our own transformations. Her closing message is not wrapped in sentimentality, but in truth. Love that is not grounded in respect will wither, and relationships that are built on pride will crumble. The only love that endures is the love that grows through humility, that survives the fire of self-discovery, that insists on equality. Elizabeth and Darcy embody this, not as unattainable ideals, but as flawed, real individuals who learned to see clearly. Their story endures because it does not promise perfection. It promises growth. And so the legacy of Pride and Prejudice is not only the romance that readers swoon over, nor the witty exchanges that echo through literature. Its legacy is a call to reflection. It reminds us that the true triumph of love is not found in grand gestures or perfect moments, but in the steady work of transformation. It asks us to see ourselves in Elizabeth's quick judgments and Darcy's haughty pride, and to imagine the possibility of change. It challenges us to believe that respect and affection can bridge even the widest divides, and that the greatest victories of the heart are won not in defiance of reality, but in its embrace. This is why, after 2 centuries, the world still turns its pages, still breathes life into its characters, still finds hope in its ending. Pride and Prejudice is not just a novel of its time, but of all time, because Pride and Prejudice remain, and so does the longing for love that overcomes them. Elizabeth and Darcy's marriage is not the end of their story, but the beginning of a legacy that continues wherever readers dare to believe that love can be both tender and strong, equal and eternal. They remind us that beyond pride, beyond prejudice, lies the possibility of a love that sees truly, chooses freely, and endures forever.